welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about the legendary, the epic Medusa. So Medusa remains one of the most widely recognized and most popular characters in Greek history. We typically see her depicted as a horrifying woman with snakes as her hair, and really she just, on a more symbolic note, she really just represents the patriarchal ideal of feminine rage. And I got really curious about where that depiction of her and where that rage stemmed from. So the past few days, I've been doing some research into Medusa's origin story, and I have found it to be so fascinating. So I wanted to walk you guys through her origin story and her death story as well, and talk about some of the synchronicities and the symbolism that I personally found in Medusa's story, because it's very fascinating. If you see me looking down, I have my notes here. Let's start by explaining who Medusa is and who she was. There are different versions of her actual birth story, but her origin story, one thing that people agree on is the fact that she is one of 3 sisters. And the thing that set Medusa apart from her 2 other sisters is the fact that 1, she was beautiful, and 2, she was mortal. Her sisters were immortal, meaning that they cannot be killed, and Medusa is mortal, meaning that she is, she's susceptible to mortality. She is a mortal being. So we are left to assume that she's likely human, or at least human-like. Medusa was a very, very good-hearted and altruistic character from the very beginning of her life. Men were fascinated by her beauty because she was very beautiful, and they said she had beautiful, long, flowing hair, only comparable to that of Athena, which is going to be very important in a few moments. So they would compare her and say that she was even more beautiful, and her hair and her locks were even more full than that of the goddess Athena. And Medusa really admired Athena. In fact, she wanted to live a holy life. She was a virgin, and that was by choice. She wanted to give her life to Athena, and so she pledged her loyalty to Athena and actually became one of her priestess. So Medusa actually began as a high priestess, meaning she had a lot of knowledge and spiritual abundance. So one day, as she's walking along the shore, she is spotted by the god. Sorry if the cars are loud, it's so loud over here. She was spotted by the god Poseidon, the god of the sea. And he sees her and he throws himself at her. She rejects him. He doesn't want to take no for an answer, because as a god, he feels like it is his birthright to be able to take what he wants. So he chases after her. Medusa flees, and she runs into the temple of Athena seeking refuge, which she does not find. Now, this is where the story gets a little dicey, because some versions specify that Athena refused to help Aphrodite. Other legends specify that Athena just wasn't there and wasn't able to help her in time. So Poseidon forces himself upon Medusa, and Athena catches this, and she accuses Medusa of, just having been seduced. So she doesn't take it as him assaulting Medusa. She accuses Medusa as being seduced by him. So Athena, punishment, she curses Medusa, takes away her beauty, turns her hair into snakes, and turns her face so ugly that anybody that looks into her eyes, they turn to stone. And so that is the origin story of Medusa. Now, the death story of Medusa is equally as tragic. Perseus was sent on a quest by a powerful king to bring back the head of Medusa, because it was known that she had this power to turn men to stone. It's a very powerful weapon in ancient mythology, in ancient Greek mythology. And so Perseus sets out on this adventure. He creeps upon where she is in hiding, because she has secluded herself from society. He creeps upon her, and he takes with him, with the advice of Athena, by the way, a mirror so that she would look, if she was to wake up, he could shine the mirror on her and she would see her reflection and turn herself to stone. And then in which case he could chop off her head. And that's exactly what happened. So with the help of Athena, Perseus was able to successfully end the life of Medusa, and he actually used her head to defeat several other of his opponents throughout his life, just by holding the head of Medusa up and turning those opponents to stone. So that is a very general, broad overview of the life of Medusa. So let's unpack this a little bit. Let's look at some of the symbolism in here. So the first thing that we learn about Medusa is that she is different from her sisters because she is mortal. So right then and there, we have the fact that she has a vulnerability. There is something very vulnerable about her as opposed to her sisters, because unlike her sisters, she is a mortal being. There's a human essence to her. So that's number one. Number two, she was very, very beautiful when she was young. And so she was always under the scrutiny or the pleasure or the observation of the male gaze. So in her younger years, it was because she was so beautiful. Men would travel from far and wide just to see her beautiful face. And in her later years, after she was cursed, men traveled from far and wide to own that power of hers and to kill her or to be wowed by the power that she had to turn people to stone. So that's number two. The next thing is that Medusa naively pledged loyalty to someone who does not have her best interest at heart. Athena was always very jealous of Medusa. In fact, there are stories written about the jealousy that Athena had, unbeknownst to Medusa, because of the fact that, you know, Medusa was known as having long, beautiful hair, even more beautiful than that of Athena. And very naively, you know, Medusa being such an altruistic being, she never suspected that Athena would have crossed her. Now, speaking of that, kind of in the same vein, I find it very interesting that the first thing, as a punishment, that Athena thought to do to Medusa is strip her of her beauty. She didn't strip her of her title as a priestess. She didn't just take away her abundance. She cursed her physically, made her so physically repulsive that it turned people to stone. And I think that's very interesting. I think that really speaks to the fact that a lot of women's power, especially back then, lied specifically in her beauty, because they felt like, you know, taking a woman's beauty away from her is the worst thing in the world. So there's a whole conversation regarding that right there. The next thing is kind of with that, her best trait, her best feature was her hair. And Athena was so jealous that she turned that trait against her and turned them into snakes, which I think is fascinating. Talk about light and dark feminine energy. It's very fascinating to note that Medusa's trauma became her power. Her entire power came from the traumatic event. It was similarly to Persephone, how Persephone, due to external circumstances, became a queen of the underworld, and she didn't want to be, but she had to step up and you know, take on that power. Medusa realized that because of this tragic thing that happened, because of this curse that was placed upon her, she had a power. So I just think that's fascinating, that her curse was the source of her power. Now, what's really fascinating is when you think about the fact that we as a society categorize Medusa as a villain. And I don't think that she actually turned into a villain, because Medusa, when she realized what her power was, she was found by Perseus locked away in a cave, hidden from the world. So Medusa took that power that she had and responsibly kept it away from the world and did not use it unless she needed to. And so what I find fascinating is that her own power, that dark feminine power to look upon men and turn them into stone, was not a weapon and was not a threat because of her. It was a threat and weaponized by men who sought her out to use that power against other men. So that's something else I think is very, very fascinating, and I think is very overlooked in the case of Medusa, because she was not a threat to anybody until they sought her out and they came to her lair. And the last thing is that Perseus, after he slayed Medusa, or had slain Medusa, he was known as a great hero. And he received praise and abundance and riches. And in reality, he didn't do anything heroic. In fact, he creeped upon her as she lay sleeping, and she was helpless. By the way, he defeated his next like 3 or 4 opponents by just holding up her head. So again, not necessarily a very heroic person, but he received a lot of praise, and it wasn't even his power. It was power that he literally harvested for his own benefit. And he benefited from her power, aka her trauma. Now, a lot of people read the story of Medusa and actually observe it as a metaphor for turning the male gaze upon itself. And the reason for that is because men had traveled from far and wide, like we discussed. Men had traveled to see and lay their eyes on Medusa, until the point where she was cursed, and anybody who laid their eyes on her was turned to stone. So it's almost like a metaphor, like an ultra feminist metaphor for turning the male gaze on themselves, on itself. I don't necessarily have an opinion about that, but I do think it's a very fascinating gem to go with the story. So that is our Medusa case study. These are just points and symbolisms that I just thought were very interesting to discuss and observe and kind of just ponder on in our free time. Like, what does that say about the male gaze? What does that say about, who we categorize as victims versus villains? You know what I mean? I definitely humbled myself when it came to the origin story of Medusa, because I just imagined her to be this evil woman scorned. She was like the patron saint for the woman scorned. And now, learning a little bit about her backstory, you understand that she, similarly to Persephone, she went from being, an innocent, altruistic, young, naive girl to, having her life circumstances really just nurture her in the wrong direction, kind of steer her into becoming something she didn't want to be. In fact, her intention was to be a holy person, but her life did not allow that. And so what are you left to do? She became left to her own devices. So I just thought this was a great case to study with you guys today. I really love the conversations that you guys have down below. So if you think that this was an interesting story, or if you have a recommendation for another person you'd like to see covered, I am open to that. And I would love to hear your recommendations. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.